Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? This is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology here in Owings Mills. Today is January 1, 2018. Happy New Year to everyone. As I promised on the very last video that we would be discussing whether or not the federal government should assume some responsibility in terms of protecting, should have protected, rather, Detective Suiter and his family in this second investigation involving Sergeant Wayne Jenkins' indictment. But before we get into that, and that's a question I want you guys to ponder, and you can also leave your comments. Also make a note to subscribe at the red button at the bottom of the video. This is a way if you're letting me know and let others know that we have quality programming that we're presenting to you every time that we put information out there in reference to criminal justice issues. So, but briefly before I get into the Fed's responsibility, because there is some responsibility as we've kind of researched on this matter, I wanted to discuss pretty much the homicide rate closeout for 2017 here in Baltimore, and the Baltimore Sun had reported that we topped out at 343 homicides this year in Baltimore City. Last year it was 318 homicides, and the year before that was 344. So, this is a state of where we are in this city in terms of violent crime as it pertains to homicides. But what I found interesting was that New York, having 8.5 million people, that at the end of the year they topped out roughly around 280, give or take, one or two unreported homicides. 280 out of 8.5 million people. Chicago, on the other hand, they have about the same amount of people living in the city, 8.5 million. And theirs was twice ours, which was 650 killings. Okay, but we all know that Chicago has a systemic gang problem that dates back since the 1950s and early 60s. That's something Baltimore has never ever experienced in terms of gang upstarts, that dating back that far. Let's see, LA. And let me backtrack. Chicago only has 4 million. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That's right, 8.5 million. I'm correct. Chicago, LA, has 4 million people in the city of LA. And they topped out around 271 murders. And they have a gang problem. And gangs in that locale started, back in the 50s. So I would think that the police commissioner should do some traveling this year from Baltimore City, Police Commissioner Davis, and go and talk to these major cities to find out what they're doing and what they have done to decrease the homicide rate. Because to me, I think the stats are amazing that you can have in New York City 8.5 million people and only have close to 300 homicides. In LA, you have 4 million people and only have 271. That's remarkable. So the police departments are doing something right. And when you need help, you have to ask for help, and you have to go investigate and see what other people are doing, and learn, and whether or not you can apply those same techniques and approaches to policing here in Baltimore City. Moving on. Today's topic, again, is trying to find out what role should the federal government have played at the U.S. Attorney's level in ensuring that Detective Suiter was treated as a witness in this case, and given and his family protection. We were able to find out just by reading the federal government's information and statutes governing witnesses, and a couple things jump out to us. There's a United States Attorney's Manual, Title III. It's and the letters are EOUSA. And in that manual, Title III EOUSA, it outlines what is a witness and what the role of the federal government will be. And that role falls squarely on the shoulders of the U.S. District Attorney. And in this case, in Baltimore, it would have been the acting U.S. Attorney, Steve Shenning, who brought the case against Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, as well as the other cases. But in this particular case here, he brought the case solely against Sergeant Wayne Jenkins. Now, if you didn't know, there's a big-time communication problem between the feds and local jurisdictions, and I'll tell you why. The police commissioner was pressed by the local news media after the indictment came out of Sergeant Jenkins, and that indictment also included a federal witness who was a police officer, a sergeant of the name of Ryan Ginn. And at that time, from the time that the commissioner was notified that Detective Suter was scheduled to be a governmental witness, was the day after the murder, which was on, the murder happened November 15th, the detective expired noon, November 16th. So it was after that he was notified by the feds that, in fact, Detective Suter was going to testify in front of a grand jury on the 16th of November. Now, from once the commissioner was notified, the commissioner did not relieve Sergeant Ginn from his duties at the police academy until, I believe it was on December the 1st, that he was basically suspended till further notice. And so therein lies a problem, because if the federal government had an indictment and Detective Suter was involved, in an indictment named 3 or 4 characters in there who were involved in some form or fashion, whether they were witnesses or whether they were on the scene, it would just seem to me that the federal government should have passed that information on immediately to the top brass at the Baltimore City Police Department, just to, ensure that, Detective Suter had some measure of safety as well as his family. Because quite naturally, when that subpoena came to the police department, or whether it came to Detective Suter, and it would have come to him directly at the police department, they're not going to mail that subpoena to his house. So it came directly to the police department. So somebody knew that he had gotten mail and a subpoena. And so you would think that, and you would think that somebody would have at least made mention of it to higher commands when the indictment was read. Because if I would have read that indictment and I saw where 1 or 2 of my officers were actively working on my department and they were going to be called on as witnesses or have turned evidence against other officers, I would immediately have to myself put protection on those officers, knowing how a word like that could spread, like wildfire throughout the whole police department, that you had other officers at the federal level turning on other officers, and their names would have been exposed. One of the major problems I have, though, is that you had a sergeant who was in the academy training new recruits to become police officers, and yet his background was just as shaky as pretty much the rest of those guys that were involved in this case. So I have a hard time reconciling with that. That you have a guy here who is kind of has a double like a double life. He's leaving this guy Sergeant Ginn is leading a life of always around corruption that's going on with different members of the police department, and then he's assigned to work in the police academy. So I mean, what's going on? My next follow-up question would be, well, what the heck is going on in the police academy, and what is this particular individual going to teach new recruits? Because he's certainly that's a position of ethics and credibility, and so in terms of his ethics, he has none, no ethical standards whatsoever. And so I would question, why, and question who at this point would have made that judgment call to have him assigned to work in the police academy. So that's one issue. And that police academy is, I think they have like 170 recruits now. So, they're going to be graduating fairly soon. So I just wanted to bring that up. But let's get to the real the real crux of the matter here, and let's look at the law and look at the rules and regulations that are involved in having to protect witnesses at the federal level. And here we go. Under this United States Attorney's Manual, Title III, well, 3-19-112 talks about factual witness. What is a factual witness in this case? A factual witness is a person whose testimony consists of the recitation of facts and or events as opposed to an expert witness. Okay, and that's under 3-19-112. Then there's an expert witness under 3-19-111, which says an individual is an expert witness who has knowledge, experience, and skill, training, and education. Okay, well, we already know Detective Suter was an 18-year veteran, had plenty of training and skill working in undercover narcotics. We know that Detective Suter was also trained as to be an expert in homicide detection and solving crimes. So he was, under the rule, an expert witness and also a factual witness, because he could come forth and talk about the recitation of facts as he recalled them in this particular Sergeant Wayne Jenkins case. Okay, so he qualified not only in 3-19-112, but also 3-19-111. But here we go. This is where his family should have been protected as well. Under 3-19-144 talks about protection of witnesses. Authorities, and it reads, authorities, the Attorney General is to provide for the security of government witnesses and potential witnesses and members of their families. That is written in 3-19-144, protected witnesses. So the rules are already written about the Attorney General's responsibility, the U.S. Attorney General's responsibility here locally, what his responsibility is in terms of witnesses and witnesses protection. So why we don't have, why this particular detective does not fall or did not fall under those particular provisions is unbeknown to me. And those are certainly questions that should be asked by local media. They should be asked by a lot of people in the criminal justice system. Because if we let's look at the case for what it is right now. Right now, we don't know whether this was a random act of violence committed by someone arbitrarily on the street, or we don't know at this point whether or not there were a bunch of rogue officers who constructed a conspiracy to kill this officer based upon the testimony he was going to bring forth in the case. So we don't know either way at this point. There's certainly a lot of speculation leaning towards the corruption because there seems to be more information, more circumstantial evidence, if you will, that leads in that direction, as opposed to a random act of violence by a criminal suspect on the street. That's just fact. And so that's why you have, and what we have is a variance of opinions throughout the whole community as to, you know, who killed this particular officer. However, that did not negate the government's role in the protection of that officer as well as his family. And if his family is certainly listening to this video, or if they have hired private counsel, then private counsel certainly should know this or be made aware that the federal government does play some role in not protecting Detective Suter. Now, quite naturally, if he was just, again, out there to do follow-up work, and he ran up on an individual, and the individual has criminal intent, and they got into a scuffle and he got killed, well, it happened. But again, if it was a corruption type case where he was set up, you know, then that happened. It doesn't change the fact that he died. However, the prevention of his death is something that's questioned at this point, because had all the things that are provided for him to be protected, in like any other witness in a case, especially involving organized crime. You know, we can take organized crime back to, you know, Chicago, you know, when you had gang violence like you wouldn't believe with all the big shots. So, you know, it goes back even that far, that the government had to protect witnesses. And when you have a police officer that's a witness, to me, there should be more of a heightened sense of concern that this individual is being put in a very precarious position now. Because now he has to work among the very same people that he very well will have to testify against. And so a lot of you have written to me and said, well, why was he working that day? Shouldn't the government have been protecting him? And those are great questions, because I asked the same questions myself. Why was he working that day? Why didn't the Attorney General's office notify the police department that they had a couple members that had already testified against this guy, Jenkins, and that, you know, you need to do something departmentally to get these guys removed from the particular post that they're in, because a lot of the testimony that they're giving us involves ethical, you know, violations of police department rules and regulations, which is something that's what the police department internal affairs investigation is supposed to do. You remove an officer from the streets if need be, right? Or if it's nothing where it's too, let's say just a citizen complaint of officer disrespect. Well, you're not going to remove him from the streets for disrespect. He can still work in the streets. He's just going to monitor his behavior. But once you cross the borderline, you know, where somebody has potential to be killed, it's a different story. And so you're going to have to take action right away and remove him from, you know, the situation as soon as possible. So I wanted to talk about that because that's the question that, again, many of you have asked. And again, you can see where there's a whole breakdown here between the feds and local law enforcement here with this whole case, actually. And if you watch these videos that I put out, a lot of people will say to me, well, they can't follow what the videos. Well, what I'm doing in all these videos is I'm always doing an update, So if you come new to the channel and you click on a video that's not updated, you will have more information actually when you look at the video, because you have that information just by virtue of all the latest information being reported by the media. So if you look at a video from 3 weeks ago, of course I don't have enough info. I'm behind, so to speak, but I'm really not if you keep pace with the videos. So I wanted to bring that up. And all these videos are dated, so just review the videos according to their dates, and you will be able to follow everything I'm talking about in terms of criminal justice issues as well as individual issues dealing with the murder of Detective Sue. So I just wanted to bring that up. And again, your comments, you know, that's what keeps us going in terms of a dialogue. You know, this is a community dialogue channel here, and the more folks we get to participate, the better off. And then I can bring some things forward, that questions or concerns that you have in the comments section. I can just bring them, you know, to the channel, and we'll discuss it. So, you know, I wanted to talk about that briefly. Another thing. Okay, here we go. That there have been cases around the country where police officers have been targeted for death by their own. And the most recent was an officer in Chicago PD by the name of Jerome Finnegan. You can Google that and go into more detail about what Officer Finnegan was doing up in Chicago in terms of racketeering and corruption. And here's another. And you'll start to see a parallel here with policing that goes unchecked. You have a guy here, Jerome Finnegan, who has approximately 68 complaints filed against him in the course of his career, particularly when he started working these specialized units. And also, understand this, when you really start looking at corruption and racketeering in the police department, always follow the specialized units. Because even within the specialized units is where you're going to find the most racketeering and the most corruption. Excuse me. So you only have to go back to look at the LAPD Rampart scandal. Look at some of the other big scandals in New York City, you know, early on in the 70s and 80s. You will find that the majority of racketeering and corruption cases stem from specialized units that deal in vice. And vice would be prostitution, narcotics, illegal selling of guns, gambling. So all those things are considered vice. And so those squads, when they handpick people, really need to be proactive in ensuring that they're trying to find the best officers possible to work in those units, because they know that if you don't come to the table with a set of ethics, that you could be corruptible very easily with money and power. And so, you know, that's a pattern. Just go look at all corruption cases dealing with departmental policing around America, and you will find overwhelming percentage, about 95–98% of them, come from specialized units in each department. That's just the way it is. And so when you have better oversight, you see you can eliminate a lot of that. But if you don't have oversight, it just goes on and on and on. And this is why you have a person like Jerome Finnegan who can have 68 complaints against him, and none of them virtually get investigated, and yet they were many of them were legit. Okay, to the point where, you know, this guy's bold enough to try to authorize a hit on a fellow officer who also was coming to testify before a grand jury against him. So when, you know, the police authorities push back and say, hey, well, you know, that's not the deal here in this city. You know, we don't believe that corruption to that level. We know we have corruption, but we don't believe to the level where, you know, guys will get together and orchestrate a hit. Well, I mean, there's precedent for it. So before you say no, you need to look at, you know, the precedent that's out there, that these types of things do happen and can happen. So I wanted to share that with you. And also, in this area, in the Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia area, which is it was a highly populated area, since 2004, there have been 37 people who have been government witnesses, whether on the state level or the local level, who were murdered prior to their testimony in court. They were state and federal witnesses. 37 people since 2004. So again, it's precedented that people can and will be murdered if they are going to be called before the government to testify against people in cases. Okay, it's a known fact. That's why they have the witness protection program, because it's a known fact already. So I just wanted to leave that out there with you. And once again, we'll be talking about some other issues. I haven't quite sure which direction I want to go in just yet. I'm waiting on a couple things from the police department to happen in reference to, you know, how they intend to plan on intending to do this investigation with Detective Suter, now that the FBI is not going to cooperate and help them out. So having said that, again, we want to keep this channel open. We want you guys to respond. We certainly want you guys to subscribe and make your comments, because we try to put out good, you know, quality program. And if you feel there's anything that we can afford to do here to make the programming better, feel free to leave it in your comments section. My name is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology in Owings Mills. Thank you for your time, and I wish you guys a happy new year and to be prosperous. Take care.